Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Ruthless Aggression Era podcast. I am your host, Mel Matt, and joining me tonight is my guest.
Biff Kensington the third. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Biff is here, and we're going to be talking about SummerSlam 2002. And I remember watching this, and I thought it was an okay pay per view at the time, because I watched, most of the Ruthless Aggression era pay per views live. Not all of them, but some of them. What was your first impression of this pay per view when you watched it for the first time, or when was the first time that you watched this pay per view?
First time I watched it was live in 2002. I was a fan of the WWE going back a lot further than SummerSlam 2002, so I was kind of coming into it as a long-time fan. This was a really interesting period for the company, especially as a fan. It was kind of the transition, really. You were clearly out of the Attitude Era by this point. You were getting into that Ruthless Aggression Era, and so as a fan, it was kind of a transitional period. And at the time, I was, kind of wishy-washy on the pay-per-view. I didn't think a whole lot of it, didn't really seem to enjoy it much at the time. Hindsight being 2020, it was much better than I gave it credit for being.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's an interesting pay per view to talk about here, especially with the main event, because it really is kind of a changing of the guard in a way, and a major star, that was sort of a cornerstone for a lot of the pay per views prior to here. Hulk Hogan, not at this pay per view. Hulk Hogan had. I don't think he had left the company per se, but he was off TV at this time. He got written off by Brock Lesnar. And so Hulk Hogan, who was like a huge star, is still very over at this time, not on the card here, which is it's a bit of a strange decision. But, let's see if W can recover here, because I think this card, it's pretty stacked, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the card, especially, from a perspective from today, the amount of Hall of Fame participants on this card is really astounding. I think it's the first couple of matches each have at least one Hall of Famer or somebody that's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. So, the star power on the card is absolutely there. I think it was the transition, bringing in the new main eventers, getting out of the Attitude Era, kind of getting into the new Ruthless Aggression Era, the people that we would see in the coming years. That was really starting during this time period. So it's got that feeling of the card kind of being caught between two eras almost.
Yeah, like it was sort of like a transition period, as you said. We're not in the Attitude Era anymore. We're sort of past that kind of weird period where there wasn't really much going on. We are really like about a month or two into the Ruthless Aggression Era, so it's going to be an interesting card, to say the least. SummerSlam 2002 took place in Nassau Coliseum in Long Island, New York, on August 25th, 2002. And the theme song, I forgot to bring up the theme song for Vengeance in the first episode, but I want to bring it up because this is around the time where WWE started to use, like, actual theme songs for the pay-per-views, because either they never really had any, or it was very sparingly used. Like, they were starting to use it around 2000, because WrestleMania would have a theme song where it was sort of a Jim Johnson original. I think 2000 used Sweet Home Alabama, I think, if I remember that correctly. WrestleMania 17, of course, used My Way by Limp Bizkit. Then right. Invasion used the fight song by Marilyn Manson, and SummerSlam Bodies by Drowning Pool, No Mercy, Quick Boom by Survivor, and so on and so forth. And so 2002 really like the first year where pretty much every pay-per-view has some kind of theme song, and SummerSlam is no exception. But this is a kind of an interesting theme song, because this isn't by like a well-known band. It's a Jim Johnston original. It's a song called Fight, which is a song that you can actually find on WWE Anthology. It's on the third disc. And I think it's an okay song. Like, they use it in the Triple H and Shawn Michaels video package, and it fits it really well. And I think it does fit the entire pay-per-view as a whole well. I'd be lying if I said it was my favorite WWE theme song that they used this year, but it's a decent enough song, and the same vocalist that did The End, which is the Armageddon. The end is da 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 da. It's the same vocalist for that one on here. So what do you think about the theme song for this pay-per-view?
Well, we're definitely into the new metal era of theme songs for WWE. You could definitely tell that there was a common theme going on with the groups that they would get to bring in to do the theme songs. I'm from the original era where they had the same theme song year after year. We were talking the other day about, WrestleMania 6 theme song was used 3 years running between 6, 7, and 8. But longtime fans just kind of gravitate towards that as the theme song. So it was kind of interesting, as just to what you were saying a moment ago, how we're getting into the era now where you're getting these unique theme songs for every pay-per-view. I thought it was okay. 2002 was such a weird year as a fan. The highs were nowhere near as high as 2001, but at the same time, it did not feel almost as depressing as 2003 would be. And so, honestly, 2002 is kind of unusual from that sense. It kind of just stands on its own. It's very isolated in that way. Theme song wise, I don't think anything is going to touch Drowning Pool or Saliva from WrestleMania X8, but it was fine. I mean, it was okay.
Yeah, so I think we'll go ahead and dive right into it. And this pay-per-view literally dives right into it because we do not get any kind of open video package at all. With Vengeance, we got the Pulp Fiction one, but for SummerSlam, we do not get a video package, at least the one that I watched on WWE Network. And I even have like the SummerSlam anthology version of SummerSlam 2002, and it's pretty much the same one as the WWE Network. So it's weird that there's no like open video package, especially for a big event like SummerSlam, which is one of the big four pay-per-views for WWE. So it's weird not to have any kind of like pomp and circumstance.
Yeah, this show is really weird. It kind of stands out even among the shows in that era. I mean, it comes on the air really quick. It just goes straight into the action, and it goes off just as quick, especially on the network feed, as we can see later. But you look at this, and you can definitely tell the transition is beginning here. It feels a little bit more modern than some of the older shows from the Attitude Era would. You can kind of see where some of the technical side of things that you would see in today's WWE is starting to pick up here. But yeah, it jumps right into the action. And in terms of jumping into a match, there's, far fewer matches that are as good as this one that we could talk about.
So I guess we can just jump into the action right away with our first match, our opening match. It's Rey Mysterio versus Kurt Angle. I think it's an interesting match to talk about because this is Rey Mysterio's first pay-per-view as a WWE superstar. Rey Mysterio made his debut the SmackDown after Vengeance, defeated Chavo Guerrero in his first match, and Rey Mysterio was a huge get from WCW, about a year too late, but that's neither here nor there. What do you think about Rey Mysterio coming to WWE?
Rey Mysterio has always been a very, very popular wrestler among the group of fans that I watched with. Going back to the WCW days, even further back than that, he made some sporadic appearances in Japan, and he showed up on some of the old Japanese tapes that we used to trade in my group. So, I mean, we knew who Rey Mysterio was coming in. We knew what he could do. I think the general attitude among the group that I watched with, and really among fans at that era that have been watching for a while, we were all kind of curious as to how WWE would use Rey Mysterio, being so much smaller than the average performer in the company. I think it's a huge testament not only to his skill, but to what WWE saw in him, that he was programmed almost immediately with Kurt Angle. We would come to know two of these as the SmackDown 6 as the year would progress in 2002. So, we were excited to see him in. We enjoyed his work. We knew that he could be a game changer for the company. So it's kind of excitement mixed with a little bit of trepidation. We just didn't know what was going to wind up happening with him.
Yeah, and they hyped up his debut really strongly. They got the video packages of him in WCW, like all the different masks, and they would use it as his Titantron. So they really hyped up his debut very strongly, and they put him with Kurt Angle, who is one of the best in the company at this point in time. So it's definitely a strong statement here. And I love Kurt Angle's attire here, his candy cane attire.
I definitely noticed that when I was watching earlier. It was a little bit different from his ordinary singlets that he would wear. So,
yeah, with the giant A on the front, it's very different from the ones that he was wearing prior.
Yeah, I mean, he had a very unique look. I mean, this is really during the period where he was kind of transitioning from the comedy into a more serious wrestler. He'd really begun that transition in 2001, and here in 2002 it was almost complete. This is right before the big angle with Chris Benoit was starting, so that was really kind of the doorstep, going the final step into being a serious top level player, as opposed to the more comedic figure that we had come to know in 2000 and early 2001.
And so the match starts, and Mysterio attacks Angle from behind in a flurry of high-flying from Mysterio. Kind of a douchey way for Mysterio to start things off.
I had completely forgotten about that when I was watching it earlier. It's a very douche thing to do, but it almost worked for him, so you can't fault the effort, I guess.
Yeah, so Mysterio does a lot of high flying early on, and this is one thing that I was watching, and I'm watching like all the WrestleManias for the nightly, and I just watched WrestleMania 27 last night, and I was watching Rey Mysterio and Cody Rhodes fight, and it is amazing how much Rey Mysterio slowed down in recent years, because here he's really in his prime here, more or less. Like I'd say maybe a few years prior, but right here he's just firing off on all cylinders, and it's amazing just how much he would start to slow down around the late 2011 and all that.
Yeah, when you have a guy like Rey Mysterio, and I think this could be ringing true for a lot of cruiserweight size performers. The more you see them, I think the less we appreciate what it is that they actually do. And Rey Mysterio is the perfect example for just this reason. He's had such a lengthy career in WWE. We're talking about a period from 2002 all the way into WrestleMania 27, which was 2011, I believe it was. So, I mean, that's a lengthy period of time for a guy to be going out and doing these kinds of moves, this kind of athleticism. When you see him early on in his career, some of the things he does, they defy gravity. It's kind of like with Will Ospreay. I like to joke that he's the man that physics forgot. Rey Mysterio was exactly like that. And here in this match, you see just a small little taste of what Rey Mysterio could do when he was fully healthy. And by the time we get into his later career, after he wins the World Heavyweight Championship, by the time we get into the WrestleMania 27 period, he's had so many knee problems at that point that he's not able to do nearly what he could. But Rey Mysterio at 50% is still better than a lot of performers at 100%. And so it's almost something that you take for granted as a fan, especially if you've been watching him for a long time.
I've had 5 surgeries on my left knee.
Oh God! As somebody who has yet to have the first surgery, my heart goes out to the guy. I couldn't imagine 5 surgeries. So Rey Mysterio, one of the toughest guys that's ever gotten into the ring, for sure.
Yeah, man, for sure, man. Angle goes for the angle lock early, and Mysterio misses, I believe, a new move that he's introduced in WWE. I don't think he did this in ECW or WCW or anything like that. A new move called the 619.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that was WWE exclusive. I don't remember him using that in WCW or ECW. If he did, it was very sporadic. This is definitely the first time where it was really going to be like a signature move for him. So, and it was quite an awesome move too. Um, Even today, people still try to steal it every once in a while. Cesaro will do it occasionally. Sasha Banks will do it. It's a testament to how over that move was, quite frankly.
And so Angle gains the advantage, and Angle pulls down the candy cane straps. And Angle starts to work over the knee of Mysterio, and that's what I like about it. And I think it's even more so that Rey Mysterio is this high flyer. Angle is trying to cut him down the size so he can't jump off of things, and I think that's a really brilliant move.
Yeah, it's excellent psychology in the match. Kurt Angle, he'd only been in the business for a few years at this point, but he was already a master at this. Telling stories in the ring. You have somebody in Rey Mysterio who's flying 1,000,000 miles an hour. The first 2 minutes of this match, they're moving at 900 miles an hour each. It's just incredible how fast paced the match is. And so Angle starts to slow it down, starts working on the knee, trying to get Mysterio slowed down a little bit. I thought it was an excellent story.
So Mysterio, he tries to jump over the ropes onto Angle, who's on the outside. Referee tries to prevent it. Mysterio jumps over the referee and onto Angle, which is a really cool spot. Probably my favorite spot in the entire match.
Yeah, very, very similar to the Sasha Banks and Bailey spot from Brooklyn in 2015, where he kind of does a somersault over the referee, that tope. I think that really introduces him to the crowd that may not have known much about him at that point. The crossover between WCW and WWE fans, may not have been as great. But Rey Mysterio, he's incredible. It's hard to describe him any other way. The things that he can do in this period of time, it just defies belief almost.
So Mysterio reverses the ankle lock into the 619 and West Coast pop for a near fall.
I actually thought in hindsight that he had won the match there. I had actually forgotten what the end of the match was. And so when that did not get the 3 count, I kind of jumped out of my seat a little bit. I wasn't expecting the kick out there. Again, these two have amazing chemistry. This has really been a fantastic match. And I think the crowd was super into it too. You could tell they were up for every near fall in this.
Yeah, Mysterio hits a springboard enziguri on Angle for the turnbuckle. Looks sweet. Angle reverses a hurricanrana off the turnbuckle into the ankle lock for the win. I thought this was a pretty great match, really fun opener. However, I'm not sure if Rey Mysterio should have lost his first WWE pay-per-view match. What do you think about that?
It's a very good question. Hindsight being 2020, you can make the case, for both guys needed the win here. Kurt Angle, we look now at what Kurt Angle would go on to do, especially in 2003, and you could kind of justify it from the sense that Angle was about to be really one of the biggest players for the company in the next year or two. Rey Mysterio, coming in, you put a lot of effort and time into building him up as something special, only to have him lose in really his first pay-per-view match. So this is his first big stage in the company. I prefer a finish to a match if possible. If ever there was an instance where there could have been a disqualification, a double count out, something that kind of protected both guys, I think this is where you needed to do it. You can kind of forgive it in hindsight. At the time, did not like the decision whatsoever.
Right. It's a very good question, So backstage, Stephanie talks to someone in the cast, and I really want to know the story behind that. Like, why does this random crew guy just have a cast on his arm?
I did not remember this from the first airing for when I watched the pay-per-view originally, so I was kind of taken aback. I was trying to figure out what was going on. Stephanie McMahon, so much younger back then than she is now. I'm shocked at how much older she looks now than she did back at SummerSlam 2002.
Yeah, and so Stephanie goes into her office, and Eric Bischoff is already there. Bischoff says that the office is the only GM's office in the arena, and they decide to watch the pay-per-view together. Nassau Coliseum skimping on the GM's offices.
Well, the Nassau Coliseum was notorious for being one of the worst venues to do a WWE show. That was a long-standing theme around the internet wrestling community back in the day. The Nassau Coliseum in 2002 is what Corpus Christi or Green Bay, Wisconsin are today. And no offense if anybody winds up listening from those towns. You suck as a wrestling town. Even you recognize that. So, but Nassau Coliseum, a real dumpster fire of a venue for a wrestling show. And the crowds generally were not very good, which is kind of what makes this show unique. The crowd was pretty intense and pretty into the show the whole night, which is a very rare thing for the Nassau Coliseum crowd.
Yeah, especially for the main event. Like the main event in terms of crowd reaction is very interesting. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. And so it's time for the next match on the card: Chris Jericho versus Ric Flair.
Well, I'm from Charlotte, so let me go ahead and do
this match is going to be pretty interesting.
Woo! There we go.
And so basically the whole story of this is Chris Jericho ends up attacking Ric Flair on his first night on Raw because Jericho got drafted to SmackDown on in the first brand extinction. And then around late July, early August, Jericho ends up jumping to Raw for really no reason at all. And like this is one thing that I noticed when watching all these Raw and SmackDowns from that point in time. I wanted to try and get all of them done before this episode. Wasn't able to, but when I did watch them, there was one thing that I was noticing is that around this time, a lot of guys were jumping from brand to brand, because you got guys like Jericho, Un-Americans, Triple H. Later on, you got Crash Holly. Matt Hardy goes to SmackDown as well. Rock goes from SmackDown to Raw. It's really kind of a jumbled mess, really. Like, say what you will about the brand split now, but at least the roster it's a lot more stable nowadays. I can't really, besides the shakeup, which I don't know if you could really count that. But in terms of roster trades and all that, I can really think of really only two guys that kind of jumped around, and that was Jason Jordan and Kane. But other than those two, the roster is a lot more stable than it was back then.
Yeah, and I think it ties into a lot of how things actually went down during the first draft in 2002. From a storyline perspective, I know the general consensus was that the draft made zero sense whatsoever. If you will recall, if I'm not mistaken, The Undertaker was the first draft pick for Raw, which was controlled by Ric Flair initially, before he wound up losing control of the show. And Undertaker and Ric Flair had just been feuding coming out of WrestleMania. Undertaker had actually beaten up his son David to kind of sell that feud. And then all of a sudden, Ric Flair decides to draft Undertaker first. And so it was kind of the gist of the night when you're talking about the 2002 draft. Choices are just kind of weird. They don't make a lot of sense. The NWO going to Raw when Ric Flair had spent all that time trying to convince Vince McMahon not to bring them in the first place. It almost gives you a sense that over the summer, WWE is backstage trying to correct the roster imbalances, trying to make things a little more stable. And I think that's why you see so much jumping around. With Benoit and Guerrero, they'll make it a point later on how they jumped from Raw to SmackDown. And of course, the very next night after SummerSlam 2002, there was a major defection over to SmackDown as well that kind of set the stage for the rest of the brand extension. So it's a real crazy for the roster.
It's time to shake things up, pal.
Oh, God, I am no good at a Bruce Pritchard impersonation. I'm not even sure. Are we allowed to use a little bit of mild language on here? I could do Bruce's impersonation of Vince. Well, Gall Durham, pal. Just, replace Gall and Dern. So
yeah, you can if you want to.
Well, goddamn, pal. I can't even do it justice, but Brother Love, he's amazing.
Yeah. And so the feud intensified as the two would attack each other on the go home show for SummerSlam, and Flair even interrupted a Fozzy concert on Raw. Do you remember Fozzy doing a concert on Raw?
I have absolutely no recollection whatsoever of this concert. I knew that Rick and Jericho had feuded heading into the show. Seemed like they would feud off and on for the next couple of years, but I do not remember the concert. I don't remember Flair attacking Jericho with the musical instruments. This is really kind of the end of Ric Flair's productive period. And what I mean by that, if you're a longtime fan or if you have seen any of Rick's material from the NWA years, WCW or his first WWF run, you recognize, Ric Flair as one of the all-time great performers. There's a level of excellence that you come to expect with Rick. And you watch this match with Chris Jericho and you still see, even at an advanced age, Ric Flair can still out-wrestle half the roster at this point. And this is kind of right at the end of that run where you could really count on Rick to have a great match if you really needed him to. And because from here you get into the Evolution era and Rick is noticeably slowing down. He's not as good in the ring. And so this match in particular surprised me over how good Rick actually looked in the match. Chris Jericho, what can you say? All-time great as far as I'm concerned. So you put two all-time workers in the ring and you're bound to get something special. And that's what we got here, I think.
Yeah, like the thing with the Fozzy concert is that Fozzy at the time had just put out their second record called Happenstance. And so Jericho was performing on Raw to promote that. They performed the lead, I don't know if it was like the lead single or whatever. It was a song called "To Kill a Stranger," and it is actually a good song. Actually, the performance is terrible. Like it really is just terrible because Jericho in particular is not very good here. And I think Jericho even wrote in his book like it was not a good performance because he could not hear himself on the mic or anything like that. So it wasn't a good performance. And I also think that Jericho, like, listen to Fozzy nowadays and listen to their new album that just came out a few months ago. Jericho is a much better singer now than he was in 2002. So it's really interesting to see that kind of evolution of Jericho and Ric Flair, like after. And one thing about that concert is that Jerry Lawler would not shut up during that performance. He just would not shut up. Like, these guys are bigger than the Beatles, JR. These guys are going to be on MTV. I know they are.
Oh, even in 2002, Jerry Lawler had a number of detractors over his commentary. So it definitely sounds like something the King would do.
And so after that performance, Ric Flair would come on and attack, and like he was bloody. And honestly, just watching that clip out of context, it just looks so weird. Like this bloody old man coming in and attacking it and throwing amps everywhere and microphone stands, and it's the funniest thing when you see it out of context.
That is classic Ric Flair. It's, especially if you came of age in the Attitude Era. Ric Flair made a living in 1999 by taking his clothes off and giving elbow drops to his pants. And so if you were a long-term fan, you could definitely buy that he would come charging out. All you have to do is tap Rick on the forehead and you tap an artery. So it hums like a sieve. And you could absolutely buy crazy old man Ric Flair chasing somebody around with a guitar. It's quintessential late era Ric Flair.
So to start off this match, Flair, in the words of The Rock, slaps the taste out of Jericho's mouth.
Yeah, you will notice if you go back and watch this match, Ric Flair and Chris Jericho, but especially Flair, they hit hard as hell. I was actively wincing at some of these shots that they're giving each other, especially when we get into the chops. Modern day knife edge chops cannot hold a candle to the knife edge chops of 2002. Not by a long shot. These guys need medical attention for chest-related injuries after this one.
So Jericho skins the cat and runs into a knife edge chop. And this is actually a bit of a back and forth match. I think it's making both guys look good. And Flair, like you said, at this time, it's a really interesting period for Ric Flair because he's slowly starting to kind of transition back into a wrestling role. Because for much of 2002, he was an authority figure for Raw and SmackDown, mainly Raw after the brand split. So he's mainly an authority figure at this point in time. He lost control of Raw events back in June, and he's only wrestled a few matches since then. He wrestled he wrestled I believe Brock Lesnar, Rock, Eddie Guerrero. So he's starting to kind of come back, and this is really his first real feud as a wrestler when he returned to WWE.
Yeah, because originally when he first came in, it was mostly relegated to kind of special events. He wrestled Vince at the Rumble in 2002, had like a street fight type match. He wrestled The Undertaker at WrestleMania, but it wasn't until after he lost control of Raw that he kind of transitioned back into being a full-time wrestler. And it really wasn't that long of a period from the time he went back to wrestling full-time to when he became Triple H's manager. So it's kind of interesting how you kind of catch him right in the middle. He goes from authority figure on air into wrestling mode, and then he pretty much becomes manager for most of the time in 2003 and 2004. Though he would still occasionally wrestle with Batista as a tag team as well. So.
Yeah, so the two brawl on the outside for a bit. Jericho attacks Flair using the barricade. He strips the barricade, and there's nothing but steel underneath.
Yeah, this is a good old school style of match. This kind of match would have been right at home in the old territory days. It's very deliberately paced, hard hitting. Story is easy to follow. These two guys are absolute professionals. It's a master class, really. How they're leading the crowd from each step in the match.
So Jericho chokes Flair with his wrist tape after trying to take the turnbuckle pad off. And Jericho pretty much trying out his brand new catchphrase. You remember what it was? King of the world. I'm the king of the world, baby.
It was actually a very good song, too, by Saliva. When he started using that for his new theme song. I always loved King of the World myself. But.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's a weird kind of catchphrase to use in a way. I don't know, because I think it's supposed to be like a Titanic reference, which is from '97, which makes sense, for them to start using it now in 2002.
Hey, that's shocking for Vince McMahon. Normally he's about 15 years behind the times. I'm half expecting a Boyz II Men concert on Raw any day now. So, Jericho's man crush on Leo DiCaprio. That's actually quite topical from WWE standards.
Boyz II Men did perform at WrestleMania 15, so
Son of a biscuit, I forgot about that. Vince, you beautiful bastard, on the cutting edge.
And smack dab in the Attitude Era too. That's the thing.
There you go. Yeah, see, there you go. Boyz II Men on an Attitude Era show. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and in the world of aggression and everything like that, all this new metal is the hot new thing right now. Post grunge is starting to get big. Let's get Boyz II Men to perform the national anthem at WrestleMania 15, the Raging Climax.
Whoa, now, pal! If I'm going into an ass-kicking contest, I want Boyz II Men in my corner. Okay, nothing screams badass like smooth R&B.
I can really see them making a video package. Let's say they do a recap of Triple H and Shawn Michaels from this match, and I'll Make Love to You is playing in the background. Let's face it, you can't get more riled up than that watching that.
Well, if they replaced it with Destiny's Child, maybe we're onto something. Now you're speaking my language. But wow, this was one hell of a tangent.
Yeah, we have gone off the rails big time, shooting the breeze style.
Boys to Men, I'm so sorry. I love you. Beyonce, if you're listening, I love you too. But you would not have been a good fit in 2002 WWE. So,
I mean, I'm surprised they didn't use Survivor for Survivor Series that year.
We need a time machine. We got to go back in time. This is gold, folks. You are listening to gold right now. Clean out your ears and you appreciate what you're getting. This is top-notch stuff.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, back to the match.
Still going on in 2018.
Flair turns Walls of Jericho into an inside cradle. Jericho misses a lion salt, and Jericho locks on the figure four.
That is a really good one. That's just rubbing salt into an open wound. You can't beat a guy with his own move. That's just a dick move.
Yeah, it's a perfect heel move for Jericho.
Well, it turns out it backfires on him because Rick decides to get the figure four on him in a little bit, and it doesn't work out nearly as well for Jericho. So,
yeah, and like the finish for here, like this is basically where the finish kicks in. This is a really interesting finish because right as Flair gets the ropes, he taps out, and Jericho thinks he's won. But just a hair early, he gets the rope break before he taps out.
I thought that was actually really clever of them to do it that way because I don't remember them ever really using that finish in that manner ever again. And it was kind of an interesting story in the match. You know, yes, Ric Flair gets to the ropes and it should break the hold, but he's tapping out right away. And a tap out is supposed to represent a wrestler quitting. So whether, you know, the hold should be broken or not, if Rick's tapping out, shouldn't the match be over at that point? And I thought it was very interesting how they did that. And if I was Jericho, I would have been pissed off too. The guy was sitting there pounding the mat like his life depended on it. Really interesting turn there.
Yeah, it's a really good it's a really good little thing to the match, you know. And Flair ends up low blow and Jericho behind referee's back, and Jericho submits to the figure four. So I thought that was a pretty good match. You know, what'd you think about that match?
It was really good. I really enjoyed that match a lot more than I thought I would. When you watch Ric Flair in WWE, you tend to have this impression of a guy that's kind of broken down a little bit. He's older. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. He's not moving nearly like he used to. And for a longtime fan, it's really hard to watch Ric Flair in WWE when you're used to seeing him from Jim Crockett or at WCW, where he's, you know, styling and profiling like the Nature Boy. And so when you read this match on paper, you're half tempted to think, you know, Ric Flair, old, over the heel, not going to be that good of a match. Jericho's going to have to be going at half speed. This was an exceptionally good match. It was a rather lengthy match compared to, you know, some that Rick would go on to have, but it was just a hard-hitting match, and it was a good match. It was entertaining. You never felt like Rick was out of place here. And really the only hang-up with it was whether Rick should have beat Chris Jericho, but given where they were going with Rick, it almost made sense for him to get the win here.
Yeah, and I like that you point out that Jericho, you know, where Jericho should have lost here, because, you know, he's not having a good pay-per-view record so far because in terms of pay-per-views, he hasn't won a match since No Way Out back in February. And that was when he beat Stone Cold and with the NWO interfering. So Jericho's not having a good run at this point in time in terms of wins and losses.
No, he ran into the Triple H freight train, unfortunately, and Stephanie McMahon and her dogs. I think what was the dog's name? Lucy had to walk the dog. The undisputed champion was relegated to dog walking responsibilities heading into WrestleMania. So 2002 should have been his greatest year. Unfortunately, it was not exactly a banner year for Y2J. He would recover later on, though. There were greener pastures ahead for him, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, but I think this is honestly, all things considered, this is probably like my favorite version of Jericho. like the rock star, self-absorbed rock star in 2002, 2003. I love this era of Jericho.
I like this era of Jericho, but I have to confess, I was very angry with Jericho during this time period because he got rid of his original Titantron. His original Titantron with like Subway and the exotic dancer, I thought that is perfect. And he got rid of it, and it was always pissing me off that he got rid of it. But no, but for real, Jericho, he's great. This was, kind of the peak of his in-ring ability. I don't think it was the peak of his WWE career. I think that would come in 2008, 2009. But, just looking at it from the perspective of in-ring work, this is Jericho at his absolute best, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's. I'll be honest. That's actually my favorite Titantron of Jericho's, the one that he was using at this time.
Well, we have a civil war developing between Titantrons. Oh no, but Jericho. I mean, what can you say about Chris Jericho? I mean, you have to appreciate everything that he's given to the WWE and to wrestling in general. That guy's been wrestling for a long time. You wouldn't, think it, but he's been wrestling longer at this point than Steve Austin wrestled during his whole career. Jericho's only, I think, gosh, I had it figured out one time. I think Jericho's career is only 5 or 6 years shorter than the Undertaker's. And so you get an impression of how long Undertaker has been around. Jericho's been around a long time. And he's wrestled all over the world. So, I mean, he is well traveled at this point in his career. But yeah, this is, if you are a new fan listening in and you want to get a good feeling, a good idea of what Chris Jericho could do back in the day when he could go at full speed, 2002, not the best year for him creatively, but this is right at the peak of his physical ability. So he's great. What can you say?
Stage to Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar. And out of context, Paul Heyman talks about Hulk Hogan. And now, like on the original pay-per-view broadcast, there was some kind of commercial for like a Hulk Hogan DVD or VHS or whatever like that, but they don't show it on the network. So it just out of context. It's just so weird that Paul Heyman just starts talking about Hulk Hogan all of a sudden.
It must have been for Hulk Still Rules. I think that might have been the anthology that was out at this time. But yeah, it just kind of cut straight to Brock and Paul talking about Hulk Hogan, and especially in 2018, you're sitting here listening to that and like, oh, this is a little awkward. Just a wee little.
It really is. Paul Heyman talks about, Hulksteroos. Musician dies. They release the best of. You, Brock. Because it was true. Like Hulk Hogan was written off because of Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan had a match a couple weeks before SummerSlam. Brock Lesnar submitted him with a bear hug and bloodied him up and rubbed the blood on his chest to absorb all that as Hulkamania.
Are you familiar with the backstage news about why they did that? I'm not sure if this is well known or not. I don't know if you'd ever heard the story about why they actually did that angle that way.
I don't think I have.
Hulk Hogan, when he first came back in 2002, if you believe what you would read on the internet, obviously, but from the people that were in the company at that time, Hulk Hogan was very amenable to ideas put forward to him when he first came back. He allegedly didn't have any problem putting The Rock over at WrestleMania. And the reputation on Hulk Hogan, especially in the 1990s, was a guy that would politic. He would always try to get things to work out in his favor. The title win that Hogan had in 2002 was supposed to cash in on his popularity. Vince wasn't anticipating how popular Hulk was going to be. And, of course, the title reign didn't last very long. He wound up losing it to The Undertaker shortly thereafter. But around the time that we were approaching SummerSlam, Hulk Hogan was starting to politic a little bit more backstage. And the rumor at the time was that Hogan was not happy about putting Brock over, and so they did the finish that they did with the bear hug and Hogan passing out. and it was supposed to lead to Hogan getting a win back over Brock Lesnar. And Vince kind of put the kibosh on that. And so Hogan wound up leaving briefly before he came back in 2003 to go ahead and get ready for WrestleMania 19. But there was stage stuff that was being reported on at the time with Hogan, kind of reverting back to his old WCW ways. It's really quite fascinating, this period. Kind of a battle of wills between Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan that really would go on for the rest of his time in WWE.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised to hear about Hogan politicking.
What a
surprising
shocker.
at all.
That is a shocker, I know. But yeah, it's some real steedy stuff when you get into it, trying to figure out, who's trying to work over who. But out of context, the Hulk Hogan name drop here, kind of awkward, but it's all is forgiven with the Brock and Rock match later on. So
and the rest of the segment is basically Heyman just giving Brock a pep talk. You will become the undisputed champion. You are the next big thing. All that stuff.
Yeah, and can we take a moment to appreciate Paul Heyman's ponytail? I mean, it's a thing of beauty.
I miss it so badly.
Beauty, Paul. Why did you have to get old? You need to grow you a ponytail. I mean, it makes you infinitely cooler. Yes, you look more serious now, but dude, Paul Lee in a ponytail, that was like, it was perfect. And you chopped it off and you ruined it, Paul. Shame.
Yeah, there was something so special about it, especially when he braided it in 2006. I think that was the piece de resistance of it.
He was a master at getting heel heat. It's not just enough to have the ponytail, but you got to braid it to get maximum heat from the crowd. So, Paul's great.
So, yeah. So, speaking of haircuts, Eddie Guerrero versus Edge.
It's hard to watch an Eddie Guerrero match. It really is. It's so sad. It's a joyful thing at some points, but Eddie Guerrero. People that are watching today that weren't around when he was doing his thing, they have no idea how awesome that guy was.
So basically, this whole match started because Eddie Guerrero is apparently jealous of Edge's popularity, if you believe Michael Cole, which I'm not inclined to do.
That is a tough bridge to cross. Shall we believe Michael Cole? Can I use a lifeline on this one? I don't know. Well, Edge, this is a really weird period for Edge, too, because he's getting out of the tag team picture from his Edge and Christian days. And, of course, he would go back into a tag team with Ray here shortly after this. But this was really during the period where they were trying to make Edge into a main event level star. And it took them several years. He finally got there with the Rated R Superstar gimmick, I think. But this was also after Eddie's sabbatical, I think, was a polite way of putting that, when he got fired by WWE for his problems. He had come back at this point, and then a year after this would be right around the time he was really starting the lie, cheat, steal gimmick that just launched him into the stratosphere. So this is kind of right before Eddie really broke out as a big-time main event player for WWE.
Yeah, no, this match starts off and Edge he was super popular at this time, and he was putting on some good matches on SmackDown. Like, he did a really great steel cage match with Jericho, which was like Jericho's last appearance on SmackDown during his brand split. And I feel like if Edge didn't get injured in early 2003, he would have either become WWE champion or he would have at least been in the title picture.
Yeah, I could see that, actually. You could almost make the case, because Edge, when he did get hurt, he was out for so long. It almost took him almost a full year after he even came back before he really started clicking again. You could make the case, if Edge doesn't get hurt when he does, I mean, he could have been programmed into the main event picture as early as WrestleMania 20. And if you want to talk about changing history, if you were to have Edge be healthy through 2003 into 2004, you could be looking at Edge winning the Royal Rumble in 04 and not Chris Benoit. And that could completely change the future trajectory of the WWE in 2004 and beyond if Edge doesn't get hurt and misses so much time.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, and yeah, it really did take him a bit to kind of regain his momentum, and he even had to turn heel to do it. So it's really interesting to talk about, but I guess I will save that for another time, because that's a couple years away. But yeah, that'll be interesting to talk about in the future. But anyway, the match starts when Edge flapjacks Eddie, and Edge ends up tying up Eddie in the ropes and spears him.
Quite a painful looking spot, too. Eddie was just unprotected for that, and he just kind of took a shot right in the abdomen from that.
Yeah, it is weird to see someone like Eddie get tied up in the ropes, because you usually see that happen to someone like Andre the Giant or Big Show. You don't really see it happen to the guys like Eddie,
Yeah, and it's more of kind of a heel spot too. You either the heel ties up the baby face and is cheap shotting him, or a bigger wrestler gets tied up and kind of cuts him down to size. So it was kind of an awkward spot. And if you noticed in the match, actually, it seems like Edge is having trouble getting Eddie tied up into the ropes. Like Eddie has to help him get himself tied up into the ropes to make it work. But it was kind of a neat little twist on the ordinary way they do that spot.
So Edge crashes outside, and then he starts to work over Edge's shoulder, and some great psychology here. Like, I love it, sort of reminds me of what, Angle was doing with Mysterio. I think this works really well.
Yeah, Eddie Guerrero, when you look back at the Radicals when they first come into the WWE in 2000, you have so many different styles endemic to those four guys. Eddie Guerrero is quite possibly one of the best wrestlers in the history of the business at telling a story in the ring. I don't think Eddie Guerrero was the in-ring worker of Chris Benoit, because those are the two that generally get compared with one another because they were such good friends. They were so close. I think of the two, Benoit was the better in-ring worker, but when you're looking at Eddie Guerrero, what he brings to the table, he can tell a story with almost no effort at all. That's just the kind of personality Eddie had, and that was the knowledge, the intelligence for the business that he had. And so when you have someone like Edge, who is athletic, who is good looking, a really good wrestler, and then you let Eddie kind of take the lead here, tell a story, it takes what would otherwise be an ordinary match and it makes it so much more special. That's just the gift that Eddie had, and it's really on display here in this match with Edge.
Yeah, and he really does a good job of it in this match by working over Edge's shoulder, especially since one of Edge's, signature moves at this time is the spear. He uses his shoulder to do it. So I think it's a really interesting way to kind of cut Edge down to size in a way.
Yeah, I mean, he focuses a lot kicking at it. At one point, he drops a frog splash on the shoulder, which looked absolutely vicious.
I love that spot.
That was such a great spot. And I'm sitting here like, good God, his arm is broken. I'm sitting here watching like, how can you even do that spot safely? That just seems like so many things could go wrong there. But that's Eddie Guerrero. The impossible becomes possible when you have a guy that good in the ring.
Again, and Edge suplexes Eddie out of the ring at one point. Edge ends up blocking a frog splash and hits the execution for a 2 count. Eddie, like you said, frog splashes Edge's shoulder, 2 count, and Edge ends up scoring a spear for the win. And I love this match. I thought this was a great match. And I actually thought that one thing I wanted to talk about was the intensity by Eddie in this match, because this is like full blown heel Eddie. And we're not really going to see that again until maybe like his last year in the company. But this was just really when he was an intense heel, full on Latino heat mode. Just great intensity from all around. Great psychology in this match. Loved it.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best. I mean, he's very much in the conversation of being one of the greatest of all time, and just telling stories of the ring, the intensity. When he came back in 2002, his first run with the WWE, he kind of became a comedic figure with China, the Latino Heat character, Mamacita, and everything. And that's kind of how he was known to WWE audiences. And so when he comes back in 2002, and he's kind of morphed into ass kicking Eddie Guerrero, which is my favorite Eddie Guerrero, having watched him in WCW. And nobody played that slimy, vicious heel quite like Eddie Guerrero. To this day, his theme song in WCW was the best they had ever done, in my opinion. But, Eddie just had the talent to make it work in the ring. If you needed him to play a comedic character, he had great comedic timing. He was likable as a baby face, but when he was a heel, my God, you wanted him to get the crap beat out of him. He could do whatever you needed him to do. Eddie Guerrero is just such a fantastic professional wrestler. You have guys that are great baby faces. You have guys that are great heels. There are very few people in wrestling that could truly be transcendent baby faces or heels like Eddie Guerrero. He's really one of a kind.
Yeah, because thinking about Eddie, in 2000 and then in 2002, it's like watching two completely different wrestlers in a way.
Yeah, it really is. It's that transition from kind of the comedic to the serious, and he's kind of mirroring Kurt Angle, I think, in that way too, because Kurt Angle at the same time was going from the comedic stuff with Steve Austin wearing the little cowboy hat and the milk truck angle, and then when he gets his head shaved, he kind of transitions into the shooter, the Olympic gold medalist, the amateur wrestling savant, Kurt Angle. Eddie Guerrero kind of follows the same progression. He's Mamacita. He's all over China. He's, sitting there. He's just having a good time. He comes back in 2002, and he immediately launches right into that short-lived program with Steve Austin that we unfortunately didn't get to see play out. And then you see it here with Edge, beating the crap out of him, just being a completely vicious and conniving heel. It's just a joy to watch as a fan. It wasn't a joy at the time. You wanted Edge to get the win and beat up Eddie Guerrero because Eddie's a jerk. But, hindsight being 2020, you see what Eddie was doing and you come to appreciate it all that much more.
So we get a WWE no off-season commercial. How about that?
This is during the period when WWE was really insecure with itself. They had just lost their name to a panda company, the World what is it? The World Wildlife Fund, I think it is. It's got the panda, the logo. It's to this day, if you ever watch, and I'm not advocating illegal streaming, but if you ever see a stream from Britain, they still air WWF commercials on Monday Night Raw. So longtime fans kind of reminded of when Vince McMahon did the job to the panda. But they had this tendency to want to poke the bear a little bit. They would talk about how they were so much better than baseball or hockey or football. And when we got into the kind of the social media age, which it's kind of weird to look back at 2002 being before social media really, but you would see them during commercial breaks. They would say, we have more followers on Twitter than MLB, NFL, or NBA combined. And I'm like, well, no kidding. You're a worldwide company, and these places, they're mostly Canada and United States. So, but yeah, that's just something they do. They did it in '94. They had Randy Savage and a few other wrestlers do a commercial when Major League Baseball went on strike. So it's just WWE going to WWE at the end of the day.
Yeah. The NFL is the no fun league, pal.
Oh, God. This is right around XFL time, too, isn't it? That's right. Yeah. This is right around XFL time.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it had folded by this point, but it was still in that time frame a little bit.
Well, that's probably why he did it. He was and it wasn't obviously his fault. So it's Major League Baseball's fault that the XFL died. We've solved the riddle. Bud
Yeah.
Selig, you bastard.
Yeah, I think they actually do mention that MLB is on strike later on in the show, so they really try to hammer that one home.
See, that's weird because I don't remember Major League Baseball being on strike in 2002. Like, I
I
know I'm older than the average bear, but I'm not that old. I don't remember them being a labor dispute in '02, because that was the year Barry Bonds broke the home run record, was it not? I
That might have been 2006, I think. Like 2006 or 2007, I think. I could be wrong here.
it all runs together at the end. But I know the Angels
Yeah.
won the World Series that year. I know that because the Yankees were in the World Series the next year. That quite pissed me off because '04 was the good one for me. And so I kind of keep track of the World Series. So if there was a labor dispute at that time, it didn't last for long because there was a World Series in 2002. That much I remember.
Angels of the Outfield, way ahead of its time.
I love that movie as a kid. Oh man, we're gonna get into a baseball tangent here, but not quite as good as The Sandlot, but decent for its time. And Matthew McConaughey as an outfielder, just perfect.
Hey man, Rookie of the Year or nothing for me. All right.
Rosenbacher. Oh yeah, that was my mom's favorite baseball movie. She chose Rookie of the Year. I chose The Sandlot, and I think my dad was Field of Dreams. So we were a baseball family for sure. So fond memories here on this wrestling podcast of baseball movies from the '90s.
So backstage, we get an Un-Americans interview with Coach, and they bash Long Island. And the Un-Americans, last month we saw them at Vengeance. They weren't quite the Un-Americans just yet, but they were sort of transitioning to it. But now here they are full-blown Un-Americans. They're bashing America. They're flying around an upside-down American flag. They're even wearing shirts that say Un-American and have the upside-down flag on it, which I hope to God WWE did not actually sell those shirts on WWE Shop. That would have been horrifying.
Well, even if they did try to sell those shirts, I can't imagine anyone buying them because this stable sucked so much. This stable sucked. It's one of the worst things that WWE did in 2002. And they did a lot of bad stuff in 2002. So, if you're watching today and you don't know who the Un-Americans are, be thankful that you didn't have to do this. I mean, I would rather watch La Resistance tag team matches than the Un-Americans. And when you have Christian and Lance Storm in your team, 2/3 of your team are Lance Storm and Christian, and you suck that bad, you really suck. Okay. That's my comment for this coming match. They suck.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I would rather watch Un-Americans over La Resistance or even Jinder Mahal. But yeah, I do agree with you. I don't really hate it as much as you do, but I do agree that it was kind of it's a cheap heat. It's a real cheap heat. Stable, and not to mention the fact that we're not even a year removed from something like 9/11. So it's a weird time to be doing this thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what it really was for me personally. I think it's just such a lazy way to get heat. It's the same problem that I had with Jinder Mahal when he kind of became WWE champion and he just transitioned into this, evil heel foreigner type, hate America. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but it's been done in wrestling for generations now. They were doing this type of character back in the 50s and 60s. The evil heel that hates America, that's just so played out. It's so generic. It's really hard to get invested in that kind of angle or character. And I think that's what the problem here with these guys were, because Christian and Lance Storm, say what you will about Test. I know we've got a match of his coming up here in a little while, but Christian and Lance Storm, two excellent workers in the ring. Christian definitely more charismatic of the two. I think Brian Last once called Lance Storm a guy with the personality of a dead house cat. It's a little
Oh my
cold.
god.
It's a little
Oh my
cold,
god.
but Lance
To
was
say the least.
definitely more straight laced. He was kind of the stone faced guy of the team, But you had wrestling talent in that group. It's not a matter of them not being good workers. It's just the gimmick itself was just so generic, so cheesy, and really in 2002, with September 11th not even being a full year old at the point that we're watching, it's really kind of a tactless angle to run. I wish they hadn't have done it. I think there were better ways they could have went about it than they wound up going. So it's really just kind of a disappointment all around, I think, for this group.
Yeah, and so it leads us to our next match, which is Booker T and Goldust versus Un-Americans for the tag team championships, and Un-Americans jumping over the Raw with the tag team titles. And Booker T and Goldust are pretty much like a stable tag team at this point. We're gone all the days of Goldust trying to be Booker's friend. They're now basically like best friends. So it should be an interesting dynamic here.
Yeah, and really Booker T and Goldust, they were really two of the bright spots for WWE in 2002. Some of the antics between them were really fantastic. That was some of the most fun you would have watching Raw during this period was Booker T and Goldust. And then at this point, like you had just said, they had really kind of stabilized as a tag team. There wasn't kind of the backstage segments that had kind of made their early run so fun. But really, Booker T at this point, he is one of the more popular performers in the company. So the crowd is going to be up for him. They're going to be really hot for the match. Goldust, I mean, the guy's still going in 2018, and it doesn't look like he's lost much of a step here. So, he's kind of the ageless wonder, and it should be a good match.
So Goldust and Christian start the match off, and Goldust hits the rear view on Christian.
It's the move that's called the rear view. Naomi stole the rear view from Goldust.
He calls it the rear view, Maggle.
Oh, Maggle.
Thank God Bradshaw isn't on the show. Thank God.
Oh, yeah. I think at this point, we're not quite into JBL territory, but we're getting close. I think he pops up for the first time 2003, late 2003, early 2004. So, we did not know at the time the earthquake that was JBL that was coming to destroy everything. But, at this point, we were blessed with Michael Cole and Taz, who, to their credit, were a very decent commentary team for the time period. They really were. They really weren't that bad.
I'm not really a fan of Cole and Taz, honestly. I thought that didn't really have much chemistry, in my opinion. But yeah,
I think they were better on the SmackDown shows on TV because of post production. I think that's what helped a little bit. When I kind of see what you're saying, especially when you're in the live setting, they're not as good. But at the same time, compared to Byron Saxton or Percy Watson or Michael Cole, Tom Phillips today, it sounds like a freaking orchestra. so, I mean, I'll take 2002 over any of the announced teams we have right now, with maybe the exception of Mauro Ranallo. So,
yeah, fair enough. So Goldust and Booker have the advantage early on, and Un-Americans take cheap shots at Goldust, and so they get the advantage for a bit. Booker gets the hot tag, but apparently Nick Patrick doesn't see it due to Storm distracting him. Worst freaking referee ever, Nick Patrick. My God.
Now, how could you say that after watching Starrcade 97? Oh, the great fast count at Starrcade 97. That was actually the slowest 3 count of the entire night. Nick Patrick, greatest ever at being bad. But yeah, that was a kind of a funny. It's fun to rag on Nick Patrick for being terrible at his job.
Yeah, like how did he ever get broke into this business? Like, really?
I think he did it the honorable way. He got his father to get him a job in it. I think his dad
Yeah,
was famous in the territory days.
yeah,
It certainly wasn't based on merit. Let's just put it that way.
yeah. Like one of the worst referees in this particular era, I think.
But definitely, I'd co-sign on that one.
Though it was fun to see Earl Hebner beat him up at Invasion. I will say that.
Yeah, Nick Patrick and Earl Hebner. That was the showdown that we were all waiting for. We never got Goldberg and Steve Austin, but by God, we got Nick Patrick and Earl Hebner. So it was all worth it in the end. The Invasion was a success for that very reason.
I mean, if that doesn't put butts in the seats, what will? I mean, really.
Hey, it gave me the vapors, man. I was a fan for life after that. So, oh, don't you just love podcasting?
Yeah, yeah. This has been a fun, dare I say, chaotic episode so far, and we're only halfway through.
Only partially have to censor it in the hindsight. So, we're getting a great clip here, folks. You enjoy yourselves listening in.
So Goldust sends Christian into Storm, and Un-Americans miss a concerto on Goldust. Booker finally gets the hot tag, and Storm accidentally kicks Patrick, which is what he deserves for being such a terrible referee. I'll teach you a lesson.
I'm starting to get this. I'm starting to get the sense that you have a little bit of a personal gripe here with Nick Patrick. Is there more to the story than we're getting here? Or do you just really not like Nick Patrick?
I just really don't like Nick Patrick. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but I do not. I don't think he's very good at his job. That's probably the nicest way I can put it.
You're a nice guy, Nick Patrick, but we hate you.
Plus he kept screwing me over on Raw too for the Xbox. So
okay, the plot thickens a little bit here. Now we're getting a couple pieces of the puzzle come in.
Like the slowest referee in that game.
Oh God, those were the days. The original Xbox trying to play WWE Raw on that system. Oh, but yeah, he's terrible at his job. Nick Patrick, you suck. So that's all I can say.
So much Nick Patrick hates.
I'm sorry, I can't play devil's advocate here. He sucked at his job. It may not be stimulating conversation, but damn, it's the truth. So,
So anyway, scissors kick to Un-Americans, both of them at the same time. We get a SummerSlam spin-a-rooney. Test comes down and big boots Booker, and Christian gets the win. I thought this was a pretty solid tag match. It wasn't the best in the world, but I thought this was an entertaining enough match.
Yeah, it was okay. I really think they missed an opportunity to put the titles on Booker and Goldust here. I think it would have been better had they just went ahead and put the titles on them. I don't think, even at this point, the Un-Americans were really getting over that much. And, you look at Booker T and Goldust and how popular they were, especially on a big show like SummerSlam, you kind of wonder, would they have been better off just putting the titles on them here? I think Booker T and Goldust would go on to win the titles at Madison Square Garden a little while after this show. So they wound up doing the title change anyways. Makes you kind of wonder, did they really miss an opportunity here to give Booker and Goldust a feel-good moment?
Yeah, I think that maybe they wanted to kind of leave the titles on Un-Americans just a little bit longer to kind of squeezing juice left out of that fruit. I think it would have been probably, Unforgiven probably would have been a good time because Un-Americans don't last too long after Unforgiven anyway, so might as well. But anyway, overall, solid match, I thought.
Yeah, it wasn't anything to write home about, but it was decent. It was pretty good. I mean, really, this whole card, there's not really a bad match on the card. That's really one of the great things about this show is that even when you have a match that may not be as fulfilling or satisfying as some of the others, Un-Americans and Booker T and Goldust, it's nice, solid tag team wrestling, I think.
So we go to the World, and a fan wins a makeout contest with Nydia.
Wow.
Yeah.
I Wow. Not exactly sure what they were angling for with that. That was a thing that happened. It sure did.
You like that boy? You like that boy?
I I'm kind
Just
of at
pick
a
yourself a
loss.
noodle strip steak.
I love me some Jamie Noble. I think Jamie Noble and Nydia were great together. I had no recollection of this from when I originally watched the show, which might give some indication of how long it's been since I've watched this show before this week. So yeah, I mean, what can you say? She jumps on his lap and they start making out, and that's just kind of the segment.
Yeah.
Nothing ever really happens. They just decided to show Nydia making out with some random fan on stage.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. So we go backstage to Bischoff and Stephanie, and my God, the sexual tension between these two is just palpable. You know.
Well, there's a Control Alt Delete moment. Just forget the thought of that. Thank you for that one. Wow.
And Bischoff just has this line that I swear was written for them, and like, we'll see who is on top later on in the show. Nice save, Bischoff. Nice save.
Yeah. Yeah. The acting between Stephanie and Bischoff here, not the banner moment for WWE's writers, I would say, to put it gently. And some of the dialogue here was kind of iffy by 2018 standards. I think at one point, Bischoff and Stephanie are talking about, well, what is a woman's place? And it's like, oh, you couldn't do that in 2018. So, some of this didn't quite age very well, and you're going to notice as you get further into 2002 that becomes a recurring trend with WWE programs.
Especially what happens with Stephanie Unforgiven, but that's next week's episode. So
no, be sure to tune in for that one, boys and girls, because that's going to be an interesting story.
Speaking of awkward things, Chris Benoit versus Rob Van Dam for the Intercontinental Championship.
It's quite the segue there from, now I'm going to, full disclosure, this match, we're going to talk about it here just momentarily, obviously. It's a good match. This is going to be hard to talk about. Like I told you at the outset, I've been a fan for a long time, and I originally fell out of wrestling around 1993. I kind of got out of it as we were kind of getting into the start of the new generation era in WWE. What brought me back into wrestling fandom and what kind of made me a lifelong fan of wrestling, I happened to cross an episode of WCW Worldwide, and it was right after Hulk Hogan had turned heel and joined the NWO. And so for, a fan that had grown up on Hulkamania to see Hulk Hogan become a bad guy, that was quite shocking. But the very next match after that was Chris Benoit, a Chris Benoit match, and I was blown away by this guy's ability in the ring. Chris Benoit was kind of like a god among internet wrestling fans during this period. I mean, I cannot undersell it enough. Chris Benoit was to internet fans in 2002 what Daniel Bryan or Johnny Gargano or someone of that ilk is today. It's hard to kind of picture a world where Chris Benoit was worshipped like that, but that was how much a lot of us loved him in the internet wrestling community at that time. And so knowing Chris Benoit's story and how it ends up, and you see the guy that you used to love watching, and then knowing what's going to happen at the end of his life and how that kind of tarnishes everything, it makes some of his matches really, really uncomfortable to watch and especially to talk about. But, pragmatically speaking, just looking at this match, RVD, Chris Benoit, 2002, both guys are wrestling probably at the best level they were ever going to be wrestling at. So on paper, this match, just purely from an in-ring perspective, should be excellent. And as we'll see here momentarily, it does turn out to be a very solid match.
So Benoit ended up winning the IC title from RVD on Raw, I think the week after Vengeance, and he ended up jumping to SmackDown right afterwards. So Raw does have an IC title at the moment. So it's a bit of an interesting wrinkle here. It's an inter-promotional match, the only one on the card.
Yeah, trying to get the Intercontinental title between the shows. This was during the period before they really had brand-specific titles. Titles that were meant for each show. So there was kind of like that jockeying back and forth, trying to get the title between shows. And that's why you kind of had Stephanie and Eric kind of bookending the match backstage, talking about it and hoping that their respective brand's performer would kind of walk away with the title.
Yeah, it's really funny to see them just fighting over this Intercontinental title when the IC title ends up getting killed off a couple months after this show. So
yeah, 2 months later, the Intercontinental title is deactivated. That was during the under Kane and Triple H program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, like a lot. Yeah, a lot of titles were getting deactivated, like hardcore title, European title, like a lot of titles were starting to get discontinued.
Yeah, it was not the golden age of the Intercontinental title. It was about to be scrapped for a few months, very short order. So it is kind of interesting watching them fight over the Intercontinental title, and the poor thing would be dead less than 2 months later. So.
Yeah, and this was around the time where the Intercontinental title was just going back and forth between everybody, because Chris Benoit holds it, RVD holds it, Kane is going to hold it, it's just jumping around all over the place.
Yeah, there's no stability in the title at this point, and that's kind of a hallmark of the Attitude Era. Titles would jump around quite a lot. I think, really from 1998, 1999, into the Ruthless Aggression era here that we're covering now, the start of, championships were really devalued quite badly during this time. It didn't affect the world title quite as much as it did the secondary titles, but when you get out of 1997, you had The Rock, you had Steve Austin, Owen Hart, people of that level holding the title. There was still kind of the sense of tradition about the belt. By the time you get into 98, you still have some of that with Triple H and The Rock. Of course, their famous ladder match at SummerSlam 98, one of the best matches on one of the best shows they've done. By 99, the Intercontinental title's value really starts dropping. And it kind of just becomes a little trophy to be passed around by 4 or 5 guys, really, for the next 3 years. Benoit and RVD had already swapped the title once before this, I believe, and this was going to be the second time that they were involved in a title change over this belt in a month. So, I mean, we're talking about rapid-fire title changes here.
So RVD starts this match, and he knocks Benoit out of the ring, and Benoit works over RVD with some submissions, takes him to Suplex City, and both Benoit misses Air Canada, and RVD misses 5-star Frog Splash, and Benoit locks in the Cripple Crossface, some fast-paced action to start off this match.
Yeah, you have, probably at this point in 2002, probably the best in-ring worker in Chris Benoit, and then Rob Van Dam, absolutely probably the most athletic, the most agile wrestler. And so it really gives them the ability to work at a really fast, up-tempo pace. It lets them kind of do a little bit more in the ring. We're talking about 2 of the most skilled performers in their own special way. Rob Van Dam, the high-flying, the athletic. I'm not going to use the term that used to describe his wrestling style, but let's just say it involved a lot of flips, and that was kind of his MO. And of course, Chris Benoit was the technician's technician. It was a really interesting contrast in styles, and we see that early in this match, how well they work together.
Yeah, Benoit locks in the Cripple Crossface quite a few times, and even RVD locks in the Cripple Crossface at a point in this match.
Yes, To be completely fair, I would not call it the most beautiful crossface ever, but he did put it on. So he does get brownie points for trying it.
It's only on for like a few seconds.
And that's that's a good thing, I think. That did not look very good on my end, but in all seriousness, it was a very hard hitting match, and I love kind of trading moves like that. It's just rubbing salt in a wrestler's wounds when you swipe their move from them. So.
Rob Van Dam reverses a suplex in midair, hits the 5-star frog splash for the win, and takes back home the IC title over to Raw. I thought this was a really great match. This is one of my favorite matches on the card here.
Yeah, it's a really good match, and really the extenuating circumstances, it really shouldn't detract from the quality of the match itself. It was a great match. Probably the second best match on the card, depending on your view of Shawn Michaels and Triple H, which we'll get to in a little bit. But, just a really solid match between two guys that were the best at their respective styles at that point. It was a good match.
And it was weird to see Rob Van Dam with his hair down, I will say. Like, by the end of this match, his ponytail is just completely undone.
I think the ponytail had been beaten off of him. I think is what it was. So never let it be said, Chris Benoit, he was in an era where people were chopping, really hard. Chris Benoit kind of set the mark for being the most painful looking chops in the business at that point. So he probably got that ponytail beaten out.
Yeah, it just reminds me when it was that one match. I think it was like the second Asuka match where most of Bayley's ponytail was pretty much undone at the end of the match.
It's the quintessential I've just been in a war look. That's what that is. Whenever a ponytail kind of gets knocked out of place, it just kind of adds a little bit to the match and let people know that I was in a fight. You can't judge me. I was just in a really tough battle. But I mean, here, I think RVD and Benoit both were bleeding from the mouth when this was over. So they definitely put their working boots on tonight for this.
Or if you're Tony Nese, it comes off every single match.
Yeah, well, Tony Nese is perfection. He can do whatever Tony Nese wants to do. I mean, he's got an 8-pack, for God's sake. The guy is just built like a piece of granite. So
we go backstage. Eric Bischoff says to Stephanie that if she wants to see the Intercontinental title in action, she's going to have to watch Raw, and Stephanie laughs in Bischoff's face and walks out.
In the business, we call that foreshadowing.
Yeah, especially with what happens the night afterwards.
Yeah, not the banner moment of the original brand extension, I will say. But that actually is kind of tied into what we were talking about earlier about how the Intercontinental title was 2 months away from being deactivated. Originally, the Intercontinental title was supposed to be the top title on Raw. That's why they merged everything into it. They had the European title, Intercontinental title unification match. The idea was to build up that title as being a super belt. And so they would have it on Raw, while over on SmackDown, they had the disputed heavyweight championship at that point. But apparently they decided to go with the big gold belt instead, which would debut about a month after this show.
And I think in hindsight, the big gold belt works a little bit better than the Intercontinental title. It's the top belt.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The only real problem, I think, with the World Heavyweight Championship that they introduced, I think it hurt the credibility of the title in the sense that Triple H was just kind of given the title. I think if they had had some sort of tournament for it, it would have been a little bit better, because really the problem with the World Heavyweight Championship from the outset, it didn't have the credibility or the luster of the WWE Championship. And we saw that same problem in the most recent brand split when they created the Universal title. It's taken a long time for the Universal title to kind of get on the same level as the WWE Championship. Now, you could argue the WWE title kind of regressed in 2017. But to not get too far off topic, I did not like how they introduced the belt, but the concept of the World Heavyweight Championship, I think, was much needed for Raw. It was definitely an upgrade to the Intercontinental title. And quite frankly, the big gold belt, to this day, one of the most beautiful wrestling titles in the history of the business. And so it's always a treat to see that belt on TV.
Yeah, the Universal title, hasn't been done really any favors, especially with how it looks, the fruit roll-up belt that it is.
No, whoa. I like fruit roll-ups. Let's...
I do too, but,
Okay, so Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar are fighting for the fruit roll-up title and in New Orleans. That's an image that I'll carry with me to the Superdome. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, basically. Speaking of red, it's time for Booger Red in action. It's The Undertaker versus Test.
Yep. So what can you say? It's, the Booger Red face. We're going on, oh God, I'm terrible at math. What is it? 2002 to 2018. So, we are quite a ways removed now from 2002, and I still don't understand how anybody thought calling Undertaker Booger Red was going to work in the long run. I still don't quite get the whole creative process behind calling him Booger Red. So.
Well, I think Jim Ross, described it as saying, Undertaker is a natural redhead, and his character at the time was really nasty, like a booger, so Booger Red. I think there was also like some football player where that also went by the nickname Booger Red. So I think that's where JR got that one.
If it came from football, that would absolutely be where he got it from. That was about 80% of Jim Ross's repertoire at this point was football references. So, and the other 20% was soup bone rights, or damn him. That was another popular JR-ism, or indignation at Jerry whenever a female performer would come out. It's a name. I think Big Evil worked a lot better than Booger Red did personally, but for anybody that was watching during this era, he's pretty much just known as the American Badass, even though the American Badass phase of his run really only covered kind of the first part of it when he was a babyface. When he went heel, he really didn't go by American Badass much anymore. He kind of transitioned to the other nicknames, I think, more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, but it works in this match. I mean, and then this match, Undertaker, like, he's kind of in a weird period in his career because he's not in the undisputed title picture. Because last month at Vengeance, he ended up losing the title, and now he's not really doing much of anything.
Yeah, he was in a weird transitional phase of his career. He had been in the main event scene through the spring. He took the title off of Hulk Hogan at the May pay-per-view, if memory serves. And Judgment Day. Yeah, right. And he lost the title thereafter, and that's what kind of set up the Rock and Brock feud thereafter that. And so, he is feuding with the Un-Americans at this point, or he's got this match with Test, and then he would kind of be up and down the card a little bit over the next 12 to 18 months, and then it would set up for his return at WrestleMania 20 in the Deadman persona, which, as of this recording, he's never deviated again from the Deadman character. So this is kind of right in the middle. This is kind of the middle period of the biker Undertaker gimmick that he was working on during this period.
I mean, if John Cena has his way, we might see Texas Red at WrestleMania 34.
I personally am holding out hope for Mean Mark Callis. That's who I would like. I want Teddy Long to manage him. I'd like Dan Spivey to be wheeled out of whatever mental institution he's been living in. And I say that really hoping that Dan Spivey is okay. I haven't been up on Dan Spivey's status as of late. So if Dan Spivey is not able to make it, I sincerely apologize for my very tasteless comment. Um, I think Dan Spivey is okay though.
So this is Undertaker versus Test. Undertaker is in control at first, goes for old school, but Test sends the referee into the ropes, not gonna take her off balance. Test gets the advantage. Taker makes a comeback, and it's old school. Take choke slams on Americans and eats a big boot from Test. Test goes for a chair, but Taker big boots the chair right into Test's face and tombstones him for the victory. That's a match.
It was a very cool to see the tombstone. The last ride powerbomb is very good, but you will never be able to convince anyone that's been watching The Undertaker for any length of period of time that the tombstone was not his best finisher. So Test should consider himself honored that he got the tombstone as opposed to the last ride here.
Yeah, because Taker didn't really use the tombstone that much around this time. I don't think. Like sometimes he would use it, but for the most part, he used the last ride.
Yeah, and it was interesting too because when he tombstoned him, he actually pinned him like he would as the Dead Man Undertaker character. So that was interesting. It was interesting. I did take note of that. When he pinned Test, he kind of pinned him like the Dead Man would have. So it was kind of a neat little throwback to the Dead Man character here before he actually went back to using it in 2004.
So after the match, Taker celebrates with the American flag after the match. And as far as the match goes, I thought it was a solid match. You know, not the greatest in the world, but I thought for what it was at least entertaining.
Yeah, it was a good match. It wasn't the best match of the night, certainly. And Undertaker, there are some people that really liked this period for the Undertaker. I am more partial to the Dead Man character, and that's almost entirely because of nostalgia. I started watching wrestling in 1989, 1990, and he debuted as the Undertaker in Survivor Series 1990. So I've been watching this guy as the Dead Man for so long. I will say, you know, turning from Dead Man to American Badass to Booger Red, Big Evil, you know, it was needed at the time to help freshen him up because he had been going for so long and he had pretty much done everything he could at that point as the Dead Man character. Undertaker's match quality during this period is very up and down. And as you get into the next couple of shows, Unforgiven, the month after this, and I'm wanting to say it was No Mercy in 2002, where he wrestled Brock Lesnar in the Hell in a Cell match. You know, you could get really good matches out of Undertaker, or you could get really bad matches out of Undertaker. And it's quite interesting here to see him in this phase where, you know, the match quality kind of varies show to show. And it's interesting for people that wound up watching him between, you know, 2007, 2008, 9, 10, into kind of the modern age where for a long time, The Undertaker was known as, you know, putting on really excellent matches every year at WrestleMania. Some of his matches with Edge in 2008 were just freaking fantastic. So it's kind of amazing to see the transformation of The Undertaker over time from what he was in 2002 to what he would become by the end of the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yeah, and I've always liked the biker Taker character. I mean, but that was also the Taker that I grew up with. It was the first Undertaker I ever saw, so it's more so kind of nostalgia speaking for it, you know. But yeah, I do agree that Taker could be off and on throughout this match, you know. I can't really think of any like horrible matches that he had at this time, at least off the top of my head. But at the same time, you know, he could have some pretty good matches.
Yeah, it just, you had to catch him in the right mood. I think it really kind of depended on his mindset going in. Undertaker was never on the level of a Hulk Hogan or somebody in terms of backstage politicking, but that was always kind of the whispers in this era. And there's no real way to verify that now, you know, in 2018. It could have been something to it. It could have just been something people talked about amongst themselves. But, Undertaker, he's one of those guys where the further out you get, the more you come to appreciate what he's done, I think. And you also have to remember, too, this was during an age where a lot of fans, myself included, were not happy with a match unless it had 16 variations of a suplex in it. So that was kind of, especially among the group of people that I watched amongst, that was really what we were looking for. Undertaker was kind of more of a throwback style, kind of the brawler. Really wasn't what was in vogue for a lot of internet fans during that period. But in hindsight, going back now, watching it with kind of a more neutral perspective, I really think you come to appreciate more of what The Undertaker did offer during this period as Biker Taker.
So coming up next, this is a match that I cannot wait to talk about. I'm so jazzed for this. I'm so excited. I'm so pumped to talk about this match. It was a blast watching this match. Triple H versus Shawn Michaels in a non-sanctioned street fight.
Yeah, this was definitely the match I think that everybody was kind of talking about heading into this show. This was really the match that kind of set the stage for, the second part of Shawn Michaels' professional career. And so, looking back now in 2018 of everything that Shawn would have to come, all of the great matches, you trace it all back to this point. If this match hadn't have gone well for Shawn Michaels, there's no telling whether he ever does come back full time or not. This could have easily been a one and done if he had not been able to put on the kind of match he had before he left with injury. So, it adds that much more historical weight to a match that already had a lot of importance going into it. Being Shawn's first match back in over 4 years, a lot of people were excited about this match at the time. It was definitely one of the big hallmarks of SummerSlam 2002 overall.
Yeah, and Shawn, really just a roller coaster ride, beforehand, because Shawn Michaels had to initially retire after WrestleMania 14 due to a back injury. And he sort of stayed with WWE on and off. He became commissioner for a couple of years. But the straw that broke the camel's back was at the Raw before WrestleMania 17. Because apparently Shawn Michaels was supposed to have a part in WrestleMania 17. He was supposed to be I've always heard that he was supposed to be a special referee for Taker and Triple H. I don't know, but so Shawn Michaels shows up to Raw and he is hammered. He is not in any condition to be around. And Undertaker apparently is can you believe this guy? And Jericho even talks about it in one of his books where he's talking with Shawn at that point in time. And that was the night where Jericho ran in after a William Regal match because they were feuding at the time. And Jericho disguised himself as Doink the Clown. And Shawn is can't believe they made you Doink, man. And Jericho's but it's just a one night only thing. They didn't make me Doink. Can't believe they made you Doink, man. And, so... And Shawn Hunter did not talk for a year after this, and eventually they did make up, and HBK comes back as the leader of the NWO, and Shawn Michaels convinces Triple H to go to Raw. And it seems like they're going to form D-Generation X, and they end up Triple H turns heel for the first time in over a year. And then the next week, someone smashes Shawn Michaels' head into a car window. And apparently nobody knows who it is, despite the fact that Triple H pedigreed Shawn Michaels the week before. So how can nobody know? It's Triple H. Eventually, Shawn Michaels takes security footage of the parking lot. And it's it's really amazing what they can do with technology nowadays. And it somehow depixelizes the footage. And it's Triple H. And Triple H is I was trying to teach you a lesson, Shawn. Face facts. You can't wrestle anymore. And Shawn makes the challenge for SummerSlam in a non-sanctioned match. And that's really how the whole Shawn and Triple H feud starts. And this is how that match starts. And I think it's a really good storyline, bar one idiotic moment in the feud. But Now, what do you think of this feud?
Well, it was kind of interesting. There was the natural excitement of Shawn Michaels returning was going to probably make this feud a winner no matter how it developed. Shawn could have come out in a clown costume. Just the fact that we were getting Shawn Michaels back was big in and of itself. So really they were playing with the house's money from the start. Triple H, his babyface run had not worked out all that well. It was good to get him back into a heel alignment. And unfortunately, his heel run in 2002 and 2003 would kind of become infamous for all the wrong reasons. But at this point, it was an interesting story. It made sense. The way that in the lines, he was jealous of Shawn Michaels, and he didn't want to be standing in Shawn Michaels' shadow. And so I think that's what kind of precipitated a lot of the character work from Triple H here in terms of the story they were telling. And, plus two, Triple H at that point, if they weren't going to do a full-on DX reunion, then he needed to go heel, because that was Triple H's best character, was the cerebral assassin, the game. And it really set him up perfectly for this match. I mean, the story, say what you will about the getting attacked in the parking lot, it's one of those deals where you could buy into the story just by knowing so much about the two performers. And as you were touching on with Shawn and kind of the personal transformation that he underwent from 2001 to 2002, this is as much the start of a redemption storyline for Shawn as anything. And that would especially play into kind of some of the later matches that he would have in 02, especially at Survivor Series, that whole sense of redemption and kind of getting a sense of restoration about him after the injury, after his personal trials. And, too, we have the benefit of hindsight looking back at everything Shawn would go on to do. And, he's happily retired now. He's got a nice family. He's pretty much living the good life. And so you see, what Shawn was going through at the time of WrestleMania 17. You see him making his comeback here in 2002 and knowing how it ends in such a spectacular fashion. It just adds that much more emotional weight to the story, watching this match years later.
Yeah, this is a real turning point for both Shawn and Triple H. And Triple H, I mean, his face turn at first, it was really good. He has a lot of momentum. But I think when Hulk Hogan came in, I think that's when things kind of went downhill, because Hulk Hogan became more popular than Triple H at that point.
Yeah, they were really in a tough spot with that. The nostalgia factor was something that Vince McMahon was not really anticipating, I don't believe, because if they had anticipated it, they would not have done what they did with Hogan coming in as part of the NWO. I think if they had known how much nostalgia would play a role in Hogan's reactions, they might have just brought him in separate, to be honest. But it was a sense, strike while the iron's hot. You don't know how long the nostalgia wave is going to last. And, some of the ovations that Hulk Hogan was getting after WrestleMania were astounding. I think it was the night after in Montreal where Hogan was brought to tears. The crowd just loved this guy because WWE had been an institution in Canada. Montreal, the fans there that night, they really weren't in with the whole NWO scene, but they remembered, the real American. They remembered Hulk Hogan. So, it was unfortunate in the sense for Triple H. He kind of got caught up in Hurricane Hogan there. But, it just goes to show you, really, it's just wrong place, wrong time for him. His babyface run never really recovered. I think he wound up beating Chris Jericho in the Hell in a Cell match in May. And then after that, I don't really remember much of anything that Triple H did until the feud with Shawn Michaels came about. So it was definitely the right time for him to switch back to being a heel. I just wish that WWE had put a little bit more into the baby faces that would wind up challenging him during his heel run to come.
Yeah, so Shawn goes right at Triple H to start things off, and Shawn ends up diving onto Triple H on the outside, and immediately we get some weapons. Shawn clocks Triple H with a trash can lid and a trash can. But the big story here is Triple H working over Shawn Michaels' back because Shawn goes for sweet chin music. Triple H reverses it into a backbreaker, and Triple H even hits a DDT to Shawn on the chair and busts Shawn wide open.
Yeah, this was one of the best parts about this match, and it's one of the hallmarks of wrestling. Whenever you're dealing with a legitimate injury, if you can work that into a match somehow, that does so much of the work for you right then and there. Everybody and their sister knew going into this match, Shawn Michaels has a bad back. He had to retire because of his back, and so any move to Shawn Michaels' back is going to immediately draw a heightened reaction from the fans. They gave him a backbreaker. A backbreaker in general, it looks like a painful move, but it's just generic. It's a generic move. In this match, a backbreaker, you have that immediate fear in you as a fan that, oh God, Shawn's really going to be hurt from this, or he's really taking a chance here. And so that really adds that much more emotion to the match when they play into his history of the bad back. I think Jim Ross kept talking about how he had broken his back. I think it was a herniated disc, actually. He had to have spinal fusion surgery, perhaps, is what ended up happening. But in whatever case, it made that much more sense from the storytelling perspective. Anytime Shawn Michaels would be hit in the back area with the backbreakers, DDT, with the neck and everything, it just made it that much more impactful for the fans.
And Triple H ends up beating down Shawn with his own belt. And Triple H pulls out his sledgehammer, and Earl Hebner and Triple H renew their long-standing rivalry by shoving each other.
That is one of the underrated rivalries of both the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era, is Earl Hebner and Triple H. If you want to hear the loudest crowd reaction in WWE history, get on YouTube and search Chris Jericho's WWF title win in 2000. Earl Hebner winds up getting shoved down by Triple H. Jericho attacks him from behind, covers him, and Earl Hebner fast counts, and Chris Jericho wins the title. And in the words of Pat Patterson, the crowd went banana. They exploded. Triple H wound up chasing after Earl, who was smart enough to bring the APA to protect him. Just a great, great angle from 2000 there, if anybody ever watches it on YouTube. But yeah, Earl Hebner was not taking anything off of Triple H. He kind of backed him into the corner. Triple H is like, all right, pal, easy. Easy does it all. Move on to something else.
So Triple H ends up sidewalk slamming Shawn through a chair, which is probably one of the more famous moments of the match.
I can't imagine that was a very pleasant spot for Shawn to take. Even with somebody that has a perfectly healthy back, getting, sidewalk slammed onto a steel chair just feels and looks unpleasant.
So Shawn Michaels says sweet chin music onto the chair onto Triple H, and Triple H gets busted open. And Triple H just bleeds like a faucet here. Like, he is so bloody here. Like, wearing a proverbial crimson mask, as it would be.
Yeah, he took his aspirin before this match. He definitely bled a gusher here, and that was really, in hindsight, looking back from 2018, blood really added a lot to this match. It gave it that more visceral feel. I understand the arguments that people make about blading, but here the blood really added to it. It really sold the fact that these two guys were in a war with each other, that they hated each other. They were trying to maim one another. And Triple H, kudos to him. The dude, he bled for his art here on this night.
Yeah, so Shawn Michaels makes a comeback, beats down Triple H around ringside, and even takes off Hugo Savinovic's shoe and hits Triple H with it.
That was just mean. Poor Hugo did not deserve that. I mean, talk about just rubbing salt in an open wound, taking a guy's shoe off and beating somebody over the head with it. It's just uncivilized,
And so Shawn really is on a roll here. He hits a bulldog on Triple H on the steel steps, pulls out a ladder and attacks Triple H with it. Drop toe holds Triple H into the steel steps in the ring. Splashes Triple H through a table on the outside, an elbow off the ladder. Just so much offense from Shawn. And the finish of the match, Shawn goes for Sweet Chin Music. Triple H reverses it, goes for a pedigree. Shawn Michaels reverses that into a roll up for the win. And after the match, one of the most infamous moments, I guess you would say, Triple H ends up striking Shawn's back with a sledgehammer, not once, but twice. And Shawn gets taken out on a stretcher. So this match, fantastic. Absolutely loved it. Probably the best match of the night, I would say. Like one of my all-time favorite matches in general in WWE. What did you think of this match?
Absolutely agree there. It was definitely the best match of the night, and probably, barring any match that's escaping my memory right now, it was probably the match of 2002, I think, for WWE. It was an absolutely incredible match. I think, one of the things that made the match so special was the sense that, this was a match that nobody thought we were going to be able to see. We thought that Shawn Michaels was permanently retired. And so getting the chance to see Shawn Michaels come back, that was special in and of itself. And I think that would have added to the specialness of the match, even if they had gone out and had a bad match. But, Shawn Michaels went out there. He threw everything he could at Triple H. This was just from bell to bell, just pure action. It was great storytelling. Two guys that obviously love what they do. They have great chemistry together. Shawn Michaels, bumping around like a madman here. He's throwing himself off of ladders and through tables, and he's just doing everything he can to make this match special. When the bell rang, the match was over. You really got the sense that this match was, something truly magnificent. And the fact that, he was able to do this match, maybe it gave him the confidence to try coming back for another match. And that's why we would end up getting the run he had with the World Heavyweight Championship later in 2002. But, when you look at Shawn Michaels' career, you split it between the pre-back injury and the post-back injury. And this match here with Triple H at SummerSlam 2002, it was really the starting point of one of the great all-time runs, qualitatively speaking, that we would ever see. So you have the history behind the match, you have the meaning of the match after the fact, and you have the greatness of the match itself. It just all combines into this singular great moment that really encapsulates some of the greatness of the Ruthless Aggression era. This is really, kind of pinpointing what WWE could do really well during this period, was telling stories like this.
Yeah, I just love JR's, reaction to Triple H just doing it. Triple H just smiling as he walks off the ramp. You realize what you did, you SOB.
You're going to burn in hell for this. And yeah, I was thinking about that too as you were just bringing that up. JR was really on point for the end of that match. He sold the sledgehammer shots. You would have thought Triple H had just murdered Shawn Michaels in the ring and just left him laying there. So it was a great performance by Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler on commentary here for this match. The match itself was fantastic. Earl Hebner, the little subplot with him and Triple H was fun. Kind of a little Easter egg in the match. And the post-match, it set up the next couple of months' worth of storylines. Shawn Michaels coming back full-time, really. So you can't say enough good about this match. It is one of the highlights of 2002, and it is definitely one of the all-time great SummerSlam matches.
Yeah, and I think Shawn, really great in this match. And this easily could have been like a one and done match. Shawn easily could have called a career after this match, but the fact that he decided to stay around for about 8 more years or so, I think if it wasn't for this particular run, he probably wouldn't have had the legendary career he had. I mean, it still probably would have been impressive, but I think him coming back in this time in the Ruthless Aggression era, I think it makes it even more impressive than it already was.
Yeah, that's the really weird thing about Shawn Michaels is you almost have two different people who Shawn Michaels was as a person kind of bled into his performance during the first part of his career. And then, the transformation of Shawn Michaels, after his back injury, when he came back in 2002, he was a different person backstage, a different person in life in general. You almost think of them as two separate people. It doesn't feel like the same person in a lot of respects. But if you just take Shawn Michaels' career, before his back injury, it was a good career. He was one of the best in the world in his time. But really, if you look at his career from 2002 onward, that's what put Shawn Michaels into legendary status for a lot of people. He had so many classic matches after he came back. Most people, I believe, if you would talk with them, they actually prefer Shawn Michaels after the back injury than they do before the back injury. And he did some revolutionary stuff in 95 and 96. The ladder match at WrestleMania 10. Really edgy stuff with D-Generation X. So, I mean, Shawn Michaels had his moments before the back injury, but the quality of work that he did when he came back in 2002 from this match with Triple H, and that takes nothing away from Triple H. He held up his end here, too. Probably the best match Triple H had since coming back from his own injury when he tore his quad. But that match, the Elimination Chamber match, he had an excellent match with Rob Van Dam on Raw after winning the heavyweight title. And then you just look at what Shawn Michaels would do over the next 7 or 8 years. It really speaks to just how great Shawn Michaels really was in the ring. He is definitely one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, just from a purely qualitative standpoint.
So coming up next, we get a bit of a breeder segment. Heel Howard Finkel. This is something I totally forgot about. I completely forgot that they turned Howard Finkel heel.
Yeah, I was sitting there, we were coming off the high of the Shawn Michaels Triple H match. Howard Finkel gets in the ring, and I can't remember right now off the top of my head if it's Jim Ross or Jerry Lawler one who kind of scoff, and I'm like, what did poor Howard do to deserve that? And then he starts running down the Long Island crowd, and I'm like, oh, Howard Finkel has gone heel. I completely blacked this period of Howard Finkel's career out of my mind. Apparently, he had been feuding with Lillian Garcia at some point, or had kicked her off of Raw, I guess. It's a real hazy period. I don't have a lot of recollection about heel Howard Finkel. So,
yeah, like this was so weird. Howard Finkel as a heel, like he had turned heel like a few weeks prior to this because he and Lillian were feuding over who would be announcing Raw. And the thing with Howard Finkel's heel turn is it only lasted a month. Like after the night after SummerSlam, he goes back to being regular Howard Finkel. But this is a weird fever dream. And, Howard Finkel starts off by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, before our main event, I, Howard Finkel, have a few things that I want to get off my chest. First of all, this is the first wrestling pay-per-view that I've announced in this very arena since WrestleMania 2. It's a little something called commitment. And while Major League Baseball may be on strike, you WWE fans will always have the Fink." And so who was coming out but Trish Stratus? Trish Stratus, who has also been involved in this Lillian Howard Finkel feud and tries to make up with Howard. It's all a ruse. Lillian Garcia comes out, kicks Howard Finkel right in the crotch.
I mean, I can't hate on Howard Finkel here too awful much. I mean, obviously his choice of language would not fly today, so I'm not going to excuse that. But, what can you say? I would be distracted by getting a hug from Trish Stratus too. So, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
he fought valiant. He fought valiant. I'm trying to phrase this in a way that's not going to make me sound like a chauvinistic pig, but watch the tape, people. SummerSlam 2002, you'll see what we're talking about here. He gets a hug from Trish Stratus. I would be distracted too. So you can't blame Howard for taking the the big L here. I mean, it was just kind of a cool down spot to get everybody a chance to take a breather before the main event. So it definitely was an interesting thing. Kind of a little trivia note for future generations. Time Howard Finkel went heel and got kicked in the balls.
I mean, it gets a bit more interesting the night after SummerSlam, which is the final night of the feud, because this feud all culminates in a special tuxedo match and evening gown match: Lillian Garcia versus Howard Finkel.
I was trying to black that out from memory, but unfortunately, it's starting to come back to me now. I'm having these vague recollections of this, and I'm really disappointed that I remembered that. So the less said about that, the better. I personally, ew. Oh God. Okay. So. And on to the main event.
Yeah, and Lillian won when she, Stacy Keibler, and Trish Stratus all stripped Howard down to his red underwear. Just thought you might know that. Need full context for this feud.
Yeah, we needed full context for the feud. we are professional wrestling journalist podcasters here. So don't let it ever be said that we don't suffer for the art that is wrestling podcasting. Yes, Howard Finkel and his famous red briefs, which unfortunately was not the only time that he would be appearing in red briefs. He was also involved in a tuxedo match in, I believe, 1994 or 1995 with Harvey Whippleman. So that was a thing that happened. If you enjoy Howard Finkel in red underwear, $9.99 for the WWE Network.
And so Lillian would gain control of announcing Raw, and Howard Finkel would be banished to Sunday Night Heat, where he got to hang out with such luminaries such as Raven and Johnny the Bull Stamboli.
Quite the assortment of talent right there. Raven, he was not quite what he had once been for WCW or ECW. Johnny Stamboli, I had forgotten he had even existed. At the same time, I had sometimes forget that Sunday Night Heat existed. So even at this point in 2002, Sunday Night Heat was definitely kind of a shell of what it once was, and it was never that big to begin with. So poor Howard, he got kicked in the groin, and then he got banished to Sunday Night Heat, and he was never heard from again until he would come back for the big shows occasionally.
Yeah. And so put Sunday Night Heat on the network, WWE Network, please. I need to see that.
Yeah, well, we got WCW Thunder. And we've got a bunch of episodes of World Championship Wrestling. So keep dreaming, keep the dream alive. Sunday Night Heat.
Where is Shotgun Saturday Night? That's what I want to know.
Oh, gosh. Shotgun Saturday Night Velocity. Hey, Velocity is actually a fun show to go back and watch, especially when you see all of the people that would go on to greater fame in Ring of Honor or TNA get their start. AJ Styles shows up on Velocity. I think Samoa Joe showed up at one point. Dean Ambrose with pink hair was on one of those shows. And so, I mean, Velocity over the years was quite the little treasure trove of Easter eggs, before they were famous moments for a lot of people.
Yeah, so on to the main event. It is The Rock versus Brock Lesnar for the WWE Undisputed title, and a match where Brock Lesnar will definitely win.
Yeah, this was the foregone conclusion match of the night. Everybody knew that Brock was winning the title here. Rock was about to leave again to make a movie. I forget off the top of my head which movie he was going to make. I'm wanting to say it was the Scorpion King that he might have been preparing to make. But he was definitely going away for a little bit. So everybody knew going in that Brock was winning the title here. It was really just a question of how good the match could be. Would the crowd get into it? And boy, did they. They came alive for this match. And that says a lot about the quality of The Rock at this point in his career and the interest in Brock. Normally, when you come off of an emotional match like Triple H and Shawn Michaels, the crowd would be, really quiet, kind of burnt out. They were up for this match. So
Rock runs right to the ring, lands a few punches on Brock, but Brock hits a belly-to-belly suplex, and we get some Rocky sucks chants.
Yeah, I never like to give New York fans more credit than they deserve, but I think this, coupled with the reaction that Rock got at the Raw 10th anniversary special show that they did, may have pushed Vince to go ahead and let Rock become a heel, and that's why we got Hollywood Rock, one of the all-time great heel characters in wrestling history. So thank you, Nassau Coliseum, for, turning on The Rock. I don't think The Rock appreciated it very much. You could see during different points in the match, Rock would kind of turn to the crowd and be like, shut up. So it was an interesting dynamic. It was definitely a pretty major, sizable backlash against The Rock here during this match. It was quite interesting to hear, actually, after all these years.
Yeah, I mean, because Rock, he was on his way out again at this point. This was going to be like the third time that Rock had done this. And I think that fans were starting to see the writing on the wall, basically, because Rock, leaves right after this to go film The Rundown, I believe.
That's right. The Rundown. Yeah. You're right.
So he's going off to Hollywood again. And then, fans, I think they know what's up, and I don't think they really appreciate Rock at this point in his career. Because watching Raw and SmackDown, he is still getting big cheers. He's still very over with the crowd. But here in Nassau Coliseum, in Long Island and New York, they do not like him very much.
Yeah, I think that whole issue of Rock being kind of a part-timer, he just kind of comes and goes as he pleases. I think that definitely played a big part in it too. Something we have to consider also, Long Island, even though it's not traditionally thought of as one of the real quote unquote smart towns, full of smart fans, it was still kind of a smart town. So there was always the risk of baby faces getting booed in places like that. It was a lot stronger possibility in a Philadelphia or a Boston, but even in Long Island, sometimes the crowd would not follow the proverbial script. But I think in Rock's case, it was a multitude of factors, not the least of which was the fact that everyone knew he was on the way out. He was going to film another movie. And so it kind of put a sour taste in a lot of the fans' mouths. And it really set up Brock for success because it made the crowd very energetic. And that gave them a big energy boost in terms of match quality, I think.
Yeah, so Brock knocks Rock out of the ring, and throughout the match, Heyman constantly cheap shots the Rock, which is it's something you don't see nowadays from Paul Heyman. But back then, Heyman was constantly interfering, especially in this match.
Yeah, it was really interesting too when you contrast the relationship that Brock and Paul had in 2002 to what the relationship between Brock and Heyman is now. I think that really is kind of interesting. I don't remember the match being as competitive as it ended up being. I always thought in my head that Brock just kind of steamrolled the Rock. That's really not what happened here. Paul Heyman was taking cheap shots as often as he could, but Brock was getting as good as he was giving at different points in this match. And so it's kind of interesting to go back and watch and see, this is not the same Brock Lesnar that you would see today. Brock was not really established at the same level of being, this unbeatable, inhuman person. He was treated as the next big thing. I don't want to make it sound like he was an average guy. I mean, you could look at him and you can tell the guy looks like a freaking monster here, but it was interesting how vulnerable Brock did look at different points in this match. It really was different from how I had remembered this build being built up.
Yeah, so Rock gets clotheslined to the crowd by Brock, and in a really cool moment, both Rock and Brock kip up at the same time. I thought that was a really neat moment.
It was an excellent moment. The crowd kind of oohed from it too, and Rock's like, "What the hell are you doing?" That shocked look on his face. Rock has great facial expressions in there. Rock is so great. He was great in this match too. It was, you know, a very great match. Fun build to it too, with the training videos that they would do, showing both guys taking it very serious. But yeah, Brock, somebody of his size, having that much athleticism, there's no other way to put it. He's a freak of nature. The dude was just an anomaly at this point, and that moment where he keeps up in unison with The Rock, the crowd popped huge for it, and it was just a really cool moment.
So Rock locks on the sharpshooter and ends up pulling Heyman into the ring. And Brock ends up using a chair that Heyman threw into the ring on Rock, and locks a bear hug on Rock. And Rock ends up low blowing Brock behind the referee's back. Who's the heel here?
I think Rock did a really good job of kind of playing along with the crowd. He realized the crowd was going to boo him, so he kind of started interjecting a little bit more heelish behavior. It was kind of a jerk move, shall we say. It did not exactly endear Rock to the Long Island crowd. And if there's one thing in life that I wouldn't want to do, it's hit Rock in the family jewels. I don't know that was the smartest move from a story perspective for Rock to piss Brock off like that, but it happened, and it was definitely kind of a unique turning point in the match.
I mean, Undertaker definitely took some influence from Rock from this match. If Rock can do it, so can I.
I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. Undertaker was watching tape. he studied on Brock's weakness at SummerSlam. But yeah, it was a really great match.
So Rock bottoms Heyman through the Spanish announce table, and both Rock and Brock hit rock bottoms on each other. Rock goes for the people's elbow, but Brock avoids it. Rock and Brock go for their finishers, and both kind of avoid. It's kind of a back and forth kind of finish, but Brock finally ends up landing an F5 for the win. What did you think of this match?
I really enjoyed it. It was a tough order to follow, Shawn Michaels and Triple H, but I think they did as good a job as anyone could have done. It was a great match. It was Brock's best match in WWE to that point, in my personal opinion. It really should have been the start of a tremendous title reign for him. I don't know that the title reign wound up living up to expectations, and there's a lot of reasons that you could get into over why it didn't really pan out as well as it should have. And you'll see a lot of those reasons play out over the next couple of shows from 2002. In terms of looking at the match, The Rock, he was, one of the best in that era. He had come so far himself as a worker from 97 to 2002. And some of his best work was still to come, but The Rock is The Rock. He was great, and he made Brock look like $1 million here. Brock Lesnar, instant credibility as a main eventer. He got a win over The Rock. It was an excellent match to cap off what really was an excellent show, and can't give enough superlatives to it. SummerSlam 2002 on the whole, and the main event in particular, just excellent TV, excellent match.
Honestly, as far as that main event went, I honestly did not like that match. I really did not like this main event.
Really? Oh, okay.
I mean, honestly, it wasn't awful, I guess, but I don't know. I just found it really boring.
I think I personally, I thought the crowd interactions kind of gave it an interesting twist that it might not otherwise have had. But in terms of what Brock had been doing before, I thought it was a decent match. It's really hard to have a bad match with The Rock because the crowd is always going to be into it. But that is kind of interesting. Brock's style in 2002, 2003, I could definitely see it being more of an acquired taste. But yeah, that is kind of interesting. I will say, Brock, his title reign was pretty much downhill from this moment. And so if you watch the match and don't like it, it doesn't get a lot better for Brock in 2002 with some of the story decisions that are being made. He has a very interesting match with The Undertaker and Unforgiven, which you could talk about next time or whenever you get into that show. But that's pretty interesting. I thought it was okay myself. I thought it was a really good match to close out a really good show. But um, we'll just have to agree to disagree on that one, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Did you know that the original finish of this match?
No, I didn't know. I don't know a whole lot about the background to the match itself or what was supposed to happen. So,
Well, on something to wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. Apparently, the original plan for this, it was going to be some kind of screwy finish or whatever, according to Bruce Pritchard. But a Rock apparently insisted on Brock beating him clean.
that's interesting. I had never heard that before. But I mean, if that's the case, then my respect for The Rock grows that much more because I think, doing kind of a screwy finish or having somebody do a run in or cheat to win, I think it would have devalued what Brock was trying to be built up as. Brock was very much his nickname. He was supposed to be the next big thing. And they spent the next 2 years trying to really build him into the superstar they thought he could be. And it didn't end up working out the first time around, but kudos to Rock for doing the right thing. I think putting Brock over clean as a sheet in the middle of the ring was the biggest endorsement he could have given him. And it made Brock into a credible main event guy. It's just a shame that it didn't really work out long term for Brock in the first time around because he should have been just as prominent a member of the Ruthless Aggression era as Randy Orton, Batista, and John Cena would go on to become. But really, he had to leave WWE before he kind of created the level of star power needed to hang with his contemporaries from this era.
Yeah, I mean, and Rock was always like selfless. Like, for a top guy, he lost a lot. Like, I don't think he was ever hurt by it, but he did lose probably more than a top guy probably should have. But I think that just goes to how selfless Rock was.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it also comes to from the perspective that Rock was a third generation guy in the business, and so I think Rock more than most would have had an understanding of what was expected of a performer going into professional wrestling. I think a lot of people that come into professional wrestling, it takes a long time for people to really master their craft. The famous story of Steve Austin, he had been in the business for about 9 years before he hit it big as Stone Cold. Mark Henry debuted in 1996, but it wasn't really until 2011 that he became kind of an upper level worker that WWE had always wanted him to be. It takes time for people to develop, that sense of responsibility in the ring. And that extends into doing the right thing for business, for letting people beat them clean, like he did here for Brock. Being a third generation worker, I think, The Rock came into the business with a deeper appreciation for that side of wrestling. And I think that's what ended up helping to make him one of the more selfless main eventers in company history. But you're absolutely right. Rock's track record is not exactly sterling in the win-loss column, but it didn't really hurt his popularity all that much. He's became one of the biggest stars in the world, and that wouldn't have happened had he not had the door open for him in WWE. So, I mean, whatever they were doing with him, it seemed to work out okay in the long run.
Yeah, so I think that does it for SummerSlam 2002. I thought this was a really great show. Mine was better than Vengeance, I thought. Just a really enjoyable show from beginning to end. I thought this was a really entertaining show. I thought this was great.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the better shows of 2002, if not the best show. One of the better SummerSlams that they've ever put on. If you've never seen the show, or if it's been a while since you've watched it, I think you definitely owe it to yourself to go back, give it a rewatch, because I think you'll really be surprised at just how great the show actually could be at different points in time.
Yeah, so I think that does it. We'll go ahead and plug some podcasts here. We got Shooting the Breeze with Taker's Minion and Mr. Dr. Sinju. It goes on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern. Actually, a new episode will be on tomorrow, so that'll be really great. Violent Wrestling Podcast hosted by Ambrose Alley and Prince Moxley Lopez. Has no set date. It just goes on a whim, basically. But it'll be. I think it'll be coming sooner rather than later. Two Guys, One Sport with Crazy Chris and Curtin Jerker. You can catch that, I believe, every Thursday, I think. And Attitude Era podcast, which really inspired this podcast really to come together. Talking about a specific era of a show, so definitely check that out. They recently released an episode on Unforgiven 2001. It was a really good episode, so definitely check that out. And so we're going to be plugging ourselves. You can find me on Twitter at MetalMatt15, and you can also catch me on Cage Side Seats. I hang out in the daily and the nightly. I'm doing a series of intros. Working at every single WrestleMania. Writing intros for them every nightly intro. Tonight is going to be on WrestleMania 27. And I really need to actually write down that intro because the nightly starts in about 20 minutes. So I'm going to have to really hanker down and actually write it out. But I've already watched the show, so it'll be easy. But yeah, so where can they catch you at, Biff?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Real Deal Biff. You can also find me at Cage Side Seats. I have a weekly fan post series, The Man of 1,000 Words. There should be a new edition of that coming out tomorrow. Also, you can catch me on the Queen City Express podcast with myself and my co-host Ryan Sayo. Typically, new episodes go up every Thursday around 8 p.m. Eastern. Our very first episode was just uploaded yesterday, so you can find that on YouTube. Gonna be poking around here and there. Got some guest spots lined up for some other podcasts, so I'll be around. You see me on Cage Side Seats, or you want a message on Twitter, definitely give me a shout. I'd love to hear from everybody.
All right, so I think that's all for this episode. Next week will be an episode on Unforgiven 2002. There's going to be some interesting things to talk about in that episode. Undertaker, really the beginning of Undertaker and Brock Lesnar's legendary feud, the start of Triple H's Reign of Terror, the return of Kane, some continuations of some feuds like Eddie and Edge and Flair and Jericho. So it's going to be a really interesting show to talk about. So that's next week. I'm not sure who the guest is going to be next week, but I'll go ahead and I'll figure it out. So next week will be Unforgiven 2002 for Biff Kensington. I am Mel Matt, and I will see you all next week for Unforgiven 2002. See you later.
Adios.